Thank you all for joining us at our third webinar in our mini-series for Geothermal UK, Learning from Europe. I'm a bit sad that this is the last webinar in our mini-series because I've been really enjoying this, and thank you all for your attendance, for joining us through the series. First of all, I'd like to thank Michelle O'Grady, doing fantastic work in the organisation of the webinar series. And secondly, I'd like to introduce our great speakers here today. We have Sanjeev Kumar, who many of you know as the Policy Director of EGEC, Søren Berg Longsen from Energy in Denmark, but has also got experience from geothermal in Germany, and David Wittenstroh from the Netherlands, who will be starting our presentations in a moment. Before we jump into the presentations, just a bit of background. As you know, this webinar series was intended to inform our industry and government working group who are collaborating to make geothermal happen in the UK. But the webinar series has attracted quite a lot of interest, and we have people also from Geothermal UK and some other friends from around the geothermal space here. So welcome to you all. Very exciting. We're learning loads through this series. And today I'm particularly interested because we are hearing from our three colleagues here in the room about their experience, their past experience about making geothermal happen in their countries. And obviously, Sanjeev, you have a much wider experience, and they're going to share this experience with us, and coming out of this experience, what perhaps recommendations they have for us, or to help us understand what particularly in their countries brought geothermal on effectively. So I'm really excited for the presentations. First, a couple of practicalities. As you know, the webinar is recorded and the link will be shared later. And please use the Q&A function at the top of your screen to ask questions. Feel free to ask these questions throughout the presentations, but we'll wait till all three presentations are done before we address your questions. So thanks very much. Let's get started. We've got a lot to learn today. And so I'll hand over first, please, to David to kick us off. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I'm waiting for the presentation to load. I think you all see it now. I'm David. I do public affairs for Geothermal Nederland. And as said, you can go to the next slide, Sam. We engage in all of these types of action as an industry organization. We have 140 members in our organization or in our association. We are originally merged 3 years ago with one organization that was more lobby and one organization that was way more detailed about technicalities and helping operators share their knowledge together. This will come further back in my presentation, is data sharing and being open about what you can learn from each other. You can go to the next slide. Our achievements right now started in 2018 when we drafted a master plan, like the geothermal roadmap, like Sanjeev maybe will mention later. We drafted this as an industry organization to put out a roadmap towards a cleaner, more sustainable Netherlands and a pathway to develop geothermal for the rest of the country. Right now, we are at 7.9 petajoule production, which we find an accomplishment, but far from what we actually want as an organization. We are aiming for 50 petajoule in 2050, but that is at this point with the current pace that we have, also seeing challenges below, a difficult one because of the capex subsidy that we want. Right now, it's an STE subsidy. I will come back to that later. Permitting timelines, it's a lot of extra consultants from oversight committees, from government. That takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to get the permits completely through, and the amount of permits that we need to get. Also, I'll come back to that later. Right now we have 42 doublets, which basically are 28 wells that we have. So we have 42 different production points and 28 locations where we are right now active. Next slide. The government goal at this point is 15 petajoule, which seems doable, but that means we need to do in 5 years a double of what we have now, which is also quite ambitious with a government that is at this point more often shifting their policies and their politics than maintaining the same direction, to say it in a very nice way. Our national strategy is right now, as I said, in 2050, a potential of 210 petajoule. But we keep it more realistic in like just aim for the 50 petajoule, as we mentioned before, because 210 means that you basically need to drill everywhere that you can, but potential in the ground is there. We are working at this point towards a sector-wide commitment with the government, with EBN operators and ourselves to actually accelerate and have shared ambition and vision and goals on paper, which we can also hold the government to and keep them consecutively every year, and also over governments to the same target and direction. Next slide. As I said, I want to focus on this because this is like a big industry from all of the people that are attending here, from government, investors, operators. It falls or stands with the financial structure. And in the Netherlands, we have quite a decent and well thought through scheme, which is the SDA subsidy, but it's mainly focused on OPEX. So when there's finally a well, we start getting subsidy, which we find good for the starting phase, but we see now more and more that's actually a lack and a slowdown of getting the finances around because of the investment that is normally around 10 million in starting to drill a well in the Netherlands. So you need money at the front and not necessarily when it is operating. Next slide. As I said, CAPEX subsidy is then for us now one of the primary points that we want to readjust the SDE subsidy. There is a big sum of money, but as you could read on the slide, it may be ending, working hard to get the money back on the fund. But the CAPEX subsidy actually is reducing societal costs, because if you have an investment, let's say of a certain amount, you also need to pay the interest over it. If you have the subsidy at the front, there's way more certainty about the finances that are certain for drilling the well, which creates more often than again investors to actually invest in that certain well instead of having it later on paid back. Also, in this sense, it is important to mention that we have in the Netherlands 3 permits, starting with basically a search permit, then a development permit, and then actually a production permit. We see, because everything is necessary, that the production permit often also stalls investments from banks, for example. We aim for making it less comprehensive, less complex, to go to 2 permits and have certainty after your development, and you know that you can create a production, not necessarily directly go to production, but you know that you can create, that you can directly move onwards. That will create and gain more often more investment potential from parties. Next slide. Besides the SDE subsidy, later hopefully the CAPEX subsidy, we have an RNES guarantee scheme, which covers geological drilling risk. This isn't directly that's a success. We look more for this right now to the schemes they have in Germany and in France. They are better fitting for the sector. We also have a WIS, warm net investment subsidy, which invest or subsidizes the realization of heat network, because you can drill a well for geothermal, but you still need to distribute it to households or to industry or to greenhouses. Get mentioned, the Netherlands has been a front runner with greenhouses. The first wells were drilled by greenhouses because we have so many, and it is by them actually that started accelerating and to potential as it is. And because we had a lot of gas explorations before, we had a lot of knowledge of the underground. Then also EBN. EBN is the energy company, like the state company that was mainly investing in oil and gas and is now shifting to more and more sustainable geothermal investment. Challenges we have is a high upfront investment, around 30 million to make it complete for one well. As I said, uncertain permitting timelines that takes long and not improve the risk mitigation and market condition is because of the delay with a really big law, the collective heat law we had just recently passed Parliament. Now it needs to go through the Senate. That actually might excel our whole geothermal development. You can go to the next slide. The key lessons for the UK in this sense: policy alignment. Make sure that you have a climate strategy and make sure the geothermal operation and the goals are in line with that climate strategy or with the climate goals that the government has set. If you aim for more or for less, it's often difficult to adjust and get money or capacity in the government ready. Infrastructure readiness, make sure there is a market so you can distribute it to people. Otherwise, you can drill as many wells as you want, but if you can't get it to the people, it's basically not reaching its potential as it should. Risk mitigation, use guarantee schemes and public-private partnerships. In this risk mitigation, I also want to mention data sharing. In the Netherlands, we have a website where you can access all data about the subsurface, about permits that are already given, about the potential that is there. That's all open and public for everyone. And the parts that we don't know, we have a specific program, scan, that is done by EBN, which is in certain wide areas, as we call it, drilling and seeing what the subsurface is like and if it has potential or not. So we tried with like a government-funded scheme now to find the unknowns to be certain. So the market can take over and start drilling. Public engagement is not to forget. Make sure you take along the citizen. Make sure they don't have the fear, because if they start going into, let's say, their juridical procedures, it stalls, it delays, and often you don't get the productivity that you would like from the well. And then last but not certainly not least, think about phased scaling. As said, in the Netherlands, we started with the greenhouses, which was accelerating and was focusing and showed the potential. And now we can align it and further scale it up to the built environment. So we know already a lot from drilling there, and now we can move to the next phase. Strategic recommendations on further thoughts in the UK Geothermal Master Plan, as we did in the Netherlands. If wanted, I can share, by the way, our master plan with Arwen, and then as maybe a setup, create geothermal hubs. Try to focus on certain areas where you know something about the subsurface and start creating there a vibe and a hub and but reach there the potential first before you start developing it all over the country, because focusing on one place might create more than doing everywhere a bit. Align with the decarbonization goals. In the Netherlands, we have a quite clear goal that we want to get rid by the gas warmed for houses at 2050. So that's our aim. We know we want to go there. Geothermal is the only way and the biggest source of heat that you can think of. Leverage EU and international collaboration. Think about what we actually do here. Learn from each other, learn from other countries. You're probably not the first one that start doing something. And I think we are with that at somewhat the last slide. Okay, go to the next one. Yes. Thank you very much. And you're still on mute.
Still on mute, yes. There we go. Thank you very much. That was really interesting to hear about your experience there and your recommendations. And as you say, we are indeed learning from you, sharing learnings across Europe, which is absolutely fantastic. You mentioned your master plan. I think that's a good idea. We can share the link after this meeting in the email, because I think that's a great document too. Thank you very much. Great to hear from the Netherlands.
Thank you.
And now we'll fly over to Denmark and speak to Søren and see your presentation. Thanks very much. Hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for the opportunity to talk a bit about what we have learned in Denmark so far, and what I think you can maybe get some inspiration from. Next slide, please. So Energy is basically a company that has been set up 2017 with the purpose of developing, investing in, creating, but also operating geothermal district heating plants in particular. So what we're trying to do is to do this at industrial scale, so that we can basically do for the heating sector what solar and wind has done for electricity. So next slide, please. So the first slides here I'll go through fairly fast so that we can get to the recommendations, what I think you can learn from Denmark. I just want to point out with this slide, there are many different types of geothermal systems. The technical concept that we are focused on is the so-called hydrothermal systems, open loop systems. That's the way deep geothermal, especially for heating purposes, has been done basically for decades. So there's not really anything new on the technical side, maybe apart from a few components here and there, but basically the concept is the same as what you've seen since the 80s in Paris and elsewhere. Next slide, please. So why has geothermal not really kicked off in Denmark and in most of Europe as such? We have certainly tried, but we've not been very successful so far, and I think that's mainly because of the combination of a perceived high risk level, which I think is fair enough. There is risks involved in this in geothermal, and these risks are very difficult to handle for heat off-takers if you approach them on a single project scale, so to say. When you combine this with the relatively high, not costs, but investments, I would argue, then you have a cocktail that's a little bit difficult for most district heating companies to deal with. And I specifically said high investments because there's this perception that geothermal is high costs, and that it is not. If it is too expensive, then it won't go forth. Geothermal costs exactly what it needs to, and not a penny more, because if it's not competitive, then it won't happen. So it needs to be competitive, and it is. It can be, at least. Not everywhere, but in most places. Next slide, please. So this is where I think we bring something new to the table. That's basically the business model, and it's basically trying to replicate what has been done for decades in the oil and gas business, just doing it with geothermal. And that has to do with it. We have an oil and gas background, or at least one of our founders has. So we're basically trying to do this, to handle this risk through scale and through portfolio. So we have a lot of projects, and we have rather big projects. That's basically the key that we see to making geothermal fly. Next slide, please. So far we have a number of projects at various stages. The project in Aarhus, which I'll give you a few more details on in a second, is our flagship project, 110 megawatts of district heating being delivered there. We have another project where we have a signed contract in Copenhagen for a smaller project, 26 megawatts. And then we have a number of projects in various stages of development, Copenhagen, another number of other Danish projects, a couple of Polish projects, and some German projects, Kiel and most notably Berlin, which I think is probably the biggest district heating grid in all of Western Europe. So a massive market there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to give you a bit more details about Aarhus, because that's our most progressed project, 110 megawatts thermal is what we're going to deliver from 3 production facilities. And the first one of them is being put into operation as we speak. It will probably start, if it hasn't already delivered its first heat, it will within this week or next week. So it's very exciting times for us here at Energy currently. So for the first facility, we've drilled 3 wells and constructed the facility, and as you can see, first heat will be this quarter, and the full project, the 110 megawatts, will be up and running by 2029. This could be actually be done a bit faster, but this fits in nicely with the phase out of a huge biomass-fired CHP plant north of Aarhus in 2030. And maybe I should have given you a little bit of background for Aarhus, as you might not be aware of what kind of town or city that is. That's the second largest city in Denmark, 330,000 inhabitants, and almost all of them have district heating. 98% or something like that have district heating. So next slide, please. Yeah, these are just some photos from the project execution, some seismic being done. I think it's actually a bit more than 2 years ago now. Drilling was done from November 2023 and until May 2024. We drilled 3 wells from 2 locations, and you can also see down there at the right-hand corner that we have done a lot to talk to the public, just as David was also underlying. That's a very important thing to do when you do these projects. Next slide, please. Some more pictures also from the inside of the facility, and you can see the facility actually the outside there on that's the big green building on the lower right-hand corner there, and also from the inside some pictures of the injection pumps and the heat pumps that we use, and that's perhaps the only area where we have provided something new from a technical point of view. That's these heat pumps that are actually quite small in scale, but that makes them very modular and very easy to install, but also to service. Next slide, please. So getting closer to the recommendations, what is it that we see as what needs to be in place for us to be able to do a geothermal project for district heating? And that in our world, that means signing a contract with a district heating company for a 30-year delivery of district heating from geothermal. What needs to be in place for that to happen? Of course, we need a geothermal potential. We need a reservoir. We need somewhere to put the facility, and that's not a trivial thing when you're in a densely populated suburban area. But I think the one I want to focus on here is you need a demand, you need a market, you need a heat demand. And that's my primary recommendation for you in the UK. If you could move on to the next slide, please. And David has already covered it a little bit. The reason why we have a good potential for geothermal in Denmark is not just because we have a suitable subsurface. I think it's actually more about that we have a lot of district heating already. We have nearly 350 district heating companies across the country. You can see them there on the right-hand map there, and nearly 70% of all Danes have their houses heated by district heating. So there is, of course, a huge demand for heating, renewable heating, and that really provides a market that geothermal can then tap into if you can combine this heat demand, this local heat demand, with a local resource. So if you move on to the next slide, please. That would be my other recommendation, and here we are going a little more, getting a little closer to geothermal, something that David also mentioned, the accessibility of data. In Denmark, we have a system where when you get a license to explore and produce geothermal energy, all the data you need that you collect during your project, you have to hand in to the authorities, and then they are confidential for the first 5 years. But after that, they are basically public knowledge and publicly available. And the 2 illustrations here are from a website set up by the Danish Geological Survey, where you can actually get access to these data for free, very easy to get access to. And the left-hand side map shows you that when our geological survey look at all these data and combine them and run them through a big model, it indicates that there are geothermal potentials in almost all parts of Denmark. It's only the white areas of the map where there's no assumed to be no potential. In the light green areas, there should be at least 1 geothermal reservoir in the dark green areas, there should be even more geothermal reservoirs present. So as you can, if you combine this with the 350 district heating companies spread out all over the country, you can see that this is actually something that gives that provides the basis, the foundation for rolling out geothermal district heating at a large scale in Denmark. On the right hand side, this is just to give you an impression of the number of wells and the number of seismic lines we have. We don't have anywhere near the amount of data that you do in the Netherlands, but I think we still have enough data to get a high level estimate of also local potential, and then we will often combine this with, as you've already seen, the acquisition of new seismic data and eventually drilling of wells. Next slide, please. And I think that then concludes my part of the presentation. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Søren. It's great to see it in action. Great to see those photographs and hear about what's happening in Aarhus. Interesting challenge, I suppose, for the UK, because district heating networks aren't quite as widespread, although there is, you probably know, a big policy push towards district heat networks at the moment. So we're trying to work out how we can, tap into that literally. But brilliant, thank you. Great to have your view from Denmark. And as we said, when the questions come up, you also have your activities in Poland and Germany as well. So if there are questions on those areas, you might be able to address those too. Thank you very much. Now we take our helicopter view, is that right, Sanjeev, of the whole of Europe, and hear best practice and experiences from around Europe. Thank you very much, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Anne, and it's a pleasure to meet everybody. I'm going to go through 5 recommendations, but I'm going to kind of walk us through why they're important. So if I could have the next slide, please. It's important to start off by knowing that the potential for geothermal is absolutely huge. So a lot of the kind of bottlenecks and the challenges that we face are less technical and much more political. Next slide, please. And what you can see is this kind of, through interviews with our members, with our customers, with our agencies, with the whole supply chain, we kind of pop down the main ones on this graphic here, and you can see the North Star is really political visibility. So this is the first shell that needs to be cracked open, and the moment that's cracked open, then you can start to actually look at scale and delivering geothermal to a variety of our customer bases as and when they're needed. I won't talk through this one, but I'm going to cover all of these points later on. Next slide, please. So what's happened in Europe? So we know that last December we had a big push. The European Parliament, the Committee of Regions, were responsible for all the local governments, the Economic and Social Committee. These are all the social partners that we have across Europe. Everyone produced their own geothermal roadmap and kind of a call for a coordinated approach across Europe. And then energy ministers in December all said, okay, we need to get serious about this. We need the European Commission to come forward with an action plan and a strategy and identify 2 things. What are the issues that we can deal with at the European level where they cross-border? What are those that are actually very local, very national, which need to be dealt by and resolved by individual governments? Next slide, please. This has then kind of spurred President Ursula von der Leyen. She's mentioned geothermal 3 times this year already, which is an absolute achievement considering we were invisible for the last 5 years. Next slide, please. Importantly, the new Minister for Energy, Mr. Dan Jorgensen, who is a Dane and has just recently visited the Energy project that Søren mentioned earlier, his now standard line is that Europe is built on the coal and steel, and it will be powered in the future by wind, solar, and geothermal. And that for us is the perfect way to describe the value and importance politically. Next slide. I'm going to go straight into the 5 recommendations now. So the first one, next slide please, is the need for a national action plan. And it's important for countries such as the UK and all of the devolved regions individually to start thinking about what they can do, where they can do it, and who and what parts of the supply chain can they capitalize most upon. Next slide, please. What you can see is that almost all of the UK's major competitors, whether they're European, American, and Chinese, all have a national strategy and a series of action plans targeted towards identifying regulatory hurdles, financial barriers, supply chain development, manufacturing and localization as their key priorities. The Chinese 5-year plan picked up geothermal over a decade ago, and now China is one of the largest installed capacities for geothermal heat pumps, shallow geothermal systems, importantly network geothermal, which is very vital as an option for the UK. The US, irrespective of the politics you see here today, is still very heavily committed to geothermal. They've looked at next generation geothermal, and the last liftoff report looked at heating and cooling as well. There are a lot of fantastic projects taking off in the States already, some of which are getting federal funding as well. So there's really good material to be borrowed from these. In my opinion, I think the French government has the best in terms of energy plans, in the sense that since their very first national strategy in the end of in February 2023, they produced 3 more, and they're committed now to constantly be updating this every 2 years to make sure that they're able to tick off all of the problems that are going on. And let me just give you an example of this one. They identified in the second plan that there's not enough skilled drillers, and that in order to bring down the cost of insurance and to make the risk scheme much more effective, you need to have a bigger pool of trained professionals who know how to do drilling. They tasked the École, the mining college, to design a curriculum that's national-wide. And then what they've done this year, that when the training scheme opened up, is they made it available to all French-speaking people all across Europe. This is really good leadership, and what they're really trying to do is just to capture the skills profile and be experts in the training of geothermal. So I think it's important for the different government ministries and the stakeholders around the table today to understand that there's different parts of the value chain for geothermal which they could specialize in and make much more effective. Next slide, please. The building blocks for national plans, they're pretty much the same we've seen in every single one of these plans. We know the Ukrainian government is also working on their own strategic plan as well, and they all look at some form of a target. In some cases, it's a target for deep and for shallow geothermal. Everyone has identified permitting as a massive barrier. And need to have public support, and that's really how you leverage private capital and de-risking schemes that go with it. Skills, and I've mentioned already, and the final one is this consumer awareness. And I want to pick up this point later on. Next slide, please. So my second recommendation is to focus on sectoral agreements. And actually, part of this has already been covered by David and Soren if you read between the lines. Next slide, please. So if you identify a specific location and a specific customer requirement, you can actually scale up and develop your expertise in different types of geothermal just by working to a particular client. So let's take military bases at the moment. We know that military bases are often icebergs. What you see on the top of the military bases is only 10% of the, or a small fraction of the actual work which is done below ground. So they're a natural partner for the geothermal world. NATO's headquarters in Brussels already have heating and cooling by geothermal, and the motivation there is less sustainability, much more energy resilience, which is one of the few things geothermal brings to the table in the biggest and strongest justification. You have social housing, and I point to your colleagues in the UK, Kenza, who kind of focused on social housing. Almost all social housing providers across Europe, who are effectively property managers, are looking at investing in geothermal. In Brussels, businesses, whenever a building fails the building code, they knock the whole building out of the foundations and install a giant heat pump. Apartment blocks is another lucrative area. Data centers, I haven't added on here, but really quite vital. And then cities, if you have heat networks already, or if heat works need to be built, then actually local government is a fantastic partner to have. And much of the growth for the geothermal sector across Europe has come from cities in the first place. Next slide, please. The third recommendation is to establish a geothermal advisory committee. Next slide. Surprise, surprise, this is actually an example from the UK government, from the Northern Ireland government. This actually is something that we recommend every country, especially in the early phases, establishes. This is a fantastic scheme. It has the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, together with the Department for Energy, Belfast University. So you've got the geological experts, the government experts, the think tanks, industry, all kind of coming together, collectively building a vision and trying to grow the market inclusively. This is a really good way of going about developing geothermal, and it's certainly something the UK should be looking at replicating. Next slide, please. Fourth is to get the permitting rules. The next two recommendations are on different types of permitting. So next slide, we can go through the permitting for geothermal heat pumps, shallow geothermal for short. What you see here is that the French government has mapped 100-meter depths. All of the areas where geothermal heat pumps can be installed. This is for individual houses. You can have much larger schemes for commerces, but also to build networks of geothermal, kind of fifth generation type district heating systems. Pretty much covers all of France. The only difference is the way in which you apply for the permit. So here in the green zones, it's just a simple email to your local government. In the orange zones, there's a need to have a slightly more in-depth study. You may need to check and see if there's anything competition for subsurface activity. And in the red zones, you need to get an independent third-party assessment on the environmental impacts of the location. But by and large, you can go very quickly across France. And this is why they've identified shallow geothermal as one of the ways to go quickly in order to then build up the other parts of the geothermal industry, particularly the deeper ones. Next slide, please. The fifth, just building on this one of the really important things that will happen, and one of the things that we as an industry are most worried about is the issue of interference, where you have too many geothermal systems too close together and they start to impact negatively on one another. The Brussels the Belgian geological, has done this kind of map, this blue geo tool, where they've geolocated all types of geothermal projects, deep, shallow, open loop, closed loop, all on a database. And if you want to install your own system in your house, for example, or for your street, you just type in the coordinates, you find out the precise information. If there's anything within this nearby street, what type of customer it is, so it becomes much more easy as a permitting agency to say, well, actually, these already exist in the location, so the permitting process shouldn't be a problem. This is something we would like to have replicated everywhere, and I think importantly in a country like the UK, it's vital to have this one, especially when you have crowded urban centres and you're going to have a mixture of deep and shallow geothermal systems competing with sewage systems, metros, etc., below the ground. So understanding how they work and where they're located and how they work over the long term, very vital for geothermal, because we are a technology that sits around for decades, as Soren has mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. The final recommendation I have for you is to look at deep geothermal. Next slide. And here I would really point you to four countries. So the first one is Croatia. Croatia actually has quite a robust set of permitting rules and legislation and process. The only problem in Croatia is they haven't quite got around to getting a feed-in tariff or a two-way contract for different strike price agreed. But once that goes, you would expect geothermal in Croatia to take off very, very quickly. They've already mapped the district heating systems that exist, which are close to or on really high temperature reservoirs. And then they're looking at combined heat and power projects to take off. So Croatia really is the country, once they get that one regulatory reform done, will be one of the leading countries in terms of coverage for geothermal. Germany, very interesting. They have a Geothermal Acceleration Act, which is being legislated on at the moment. A lot of those recommendations are implementing the rules and requirements that were introduced in the latest reform of the European Renewable Energy Directive, all of which are around permitting. This is very good, and depending on how quickly the German government can get this up and running, then the only other decision in Germany is waiting for them to agree their budget from where the de-risking schemes, the public de-risking scheme and the private one, are operational. It's fair to mention that the Munich Re private scheme is already operational, and there are some cities that have already invested in geothermal using the Munich Re scheme. The Netherlands, to David's relief, is one of the countries that we look at. And this was one that most recently introduced their geothermal legislation for deep geothermal permitting. Whilst it's very, very good, there are still a number of steps that need to be taken through. And the health, and the reason why this is highlighted is that there's a very healthy discussion organised by the permitting agencies, the geological surveys, and the industry to try and find ways to speed up these, especially now that you have a new piece of law which is awaiting approval of the Senate in the Netherlands on collective heating. David mentioned this briefly, but this legislation effectively creates a market for network geothermal, for geothermal district heating and cooling systems. This is super important. The last country on the list is Bulgaria. Unfortunately, this legislation was agreed, but the Bulgarian government collapsed. And they haven't quite come back in time, but they were waiting for the Prime Minister to sign off this legislation. The reason why I think Bulgaria is very important is that we worked with them to make sure that they had all the access to the most recent European water frameworks, permitting frameworks. We looked at a few, they looked at a few American ones as well, and some other countries. So it's the most recent set of rules and regulations. And I would say that once you use some form of machine translation, this is a really important source for the UK government to be looking at and for all the stakeholders there as well. So on that note, I will stop there and we can deep dive into questions. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev, and all our speakers today. That's been really valuable, and it's very exciting to know that we have your support, that we can learn from you, that you're very open to sharing with us and helping us in our journey in the UK. Now we just have to find a way of using this effectively, so that we can our growth trajectory can be very fast. But really appreciate that, and really appreciate the presentations today. Thank you for all your very wise words. And great to see a shout out for our friends in Northern Ireland from Sanjeev. We were talking to them at our webinar last week. Great work over there.